What's up to all my product founders and creatives out there? This is your host, Lisa Montero, and you're listening to the Visual Commerce Podcast, where founders, creatives, and brand leaders bring you insights on how to tell better visual stories of your product in 3, 2, 1.
So we're here with Christine Clayton, solo creative director and designer who has partnered with iconic brands including the House of Creed, Jimmy Choo, and Burberry to define creative direction, strategy, and design. Christine, thank you so much for hopping on with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So this episode is special in that we're going to be honing in on and unpacking one particular deliverable in the creative journey, and that is mood boards. What they are, what they're used for, why they matter, and how to put them together. So Christine, could you start with unpacking your background in the creative field and what you're currently doing?
Sure. So I am currently a creative director / brand designer. And I mostly help individual companies and even larger companies sometimes expand into either new verticals or create new brands from scratch. And a lot of that work is involved with brand strategy all the way through execution, whether that's campaign execution or actual executing brand deliverables like packaging or art direction of photo shoots and campaigns and that kind of thing. So how I got here, I actually started my career in New York City in the beauty and fragrance industry. So for about a little over 10 years, I was working in corporate beauty and doing a lot of the same and similar things for much larger global corporations, and eventually became the creative director for the House of Creed and was there for 2.5 years where I led the campaign creative direction and created their very first in-house creative division. So yeah, exciting stuff there. After about 2.5 years of that work, I decided that it was time to go off on my own and sort of start doing this work for a lot of other people who were passionate about creating their own brands. And like I said, larger brands that were trying to expand into other verticals. So yep, that's where I am today.
Very cool. And you're now an expert in mood boards and concepting. So I'd love for you to get into what a mood board really is. And could you just clarify the intent and the purpose behind it?
Yeah, I think, I'm not necessarily the only person I've ever met that's probably a expert on this particular area. But I think that the reason why through my career, I've become sort of known as this mood board person or expert, or I definitely put a mood board in every single thing that I do. And the reason is because I think when you are working in-house, especially, and you're working on some really high stakes things, and you have to communicate interdepartmentally, with stakeholders who perhaps aren't as, day to day aren't as tuned into creative as some of the designers, art directors, et cetera, maybe even some of the marketing people are. It's really key and important to have tools that can bridge the concept to the execution. So before you even get to execution, like what is this going to look like? How can you communicate to these key stakeholders who are maybe they're in sales, maybe they're in social media communications, and they are going to be using these deliverables at some point. They need to understand that if they are investing in this campaign and they're going to be behind it, like what is it at the end of the day? What is this investment going to look like before they actually get to that stage of, we're actually executing this. We're hiring photographers, we're hiring stylists, we are building a campaign around this concept. So mood boards help because mood boards can sort of deliver the idea in a way that makes sense to a large amount of people without actually having to get to that point where you're executing anything.
Absolutely. So. I think that that's an important clarification. And I feel like to some it might seem obvious if they've obviously been exposed to the art of creating these enough. But I have seen plenty of mood boards where brands are looking for photography for a particular campaign, and it just ends up being a mosh pit of ideas that don't necessarily lend itself to a cohesive vision. So in alignment with that, what should a mood board really be comprised of?
It's a good question. I'm glad you asked. It really depends on the goal. So I think that, before you even begin to create a mood board, you really need to think about, like, what is the goal of the mood board? Is it a campaign mood board? Are you creating a mood board to launch a new brand? Is it a mood board to do a rebrand? Actually, a rebrand is a really good use case, because you a lot of times have a large number of people who are very invested in the old brand, and you have to, create something that's going to get them excited about what you're doing, and also get everybody on the same page without it becoming, some sort of there's a lot of personalities kind of that can be typically involved in a rebrand. So a mood board is a good way to get everybody on the same page about what you're creating. So yeah.
And I think that it's cool that you kind of cover like what some of the questions are that someone should be processing through prior to creating a mood board. And then when it comes down to the actual specifics of what needs to be included, what shouldn't be there and what should definitely be in there.
Yeah. So, going back to that thing I was just mentioning about understanding what the question is, like, what is the goal? Like, what are we doing with this mood board? Is it to create something from scratch? Is it for a campaign? Because those two things are very different. I think that if you are creating a brand from scratch, you do have a little bit more leeway to sort of, you still want to create within the brand strategy, any kind of brand strategy documentation that's been either delivered to you or that you've created as the brand strategist. You need to understand who the target audience is and the personas involved. Once you have that information and you kind of understand what the goal of the mood board is, you don't want to create something that's highly derivative, meaning I personally don't ever put images on my mood board that are within the same industry or feel like they are too closely aligned with the product that we are creating or the service that we are delivering. Only because then you start to see a lot of sameness out there, and you really can't create innovative products, design, service, etc., when you are going to Pinterest and, grabbing a lot of the same things that you see over and over and over. And I know that, trends are trends for a reason, visual things catch on for a reason, and they do well in the market. But I would say that kind of stuff could be best reserved for campaigns because they're seasonal and they probably change out. I wouldn't probably advise putting that stuff on a brand mood board, but I would say that like things to not put on a mood board, like I said, is anything derivative, anything that's been, within your own industry, nothing that speaks too closely to the thing that you're creating. Try to do things that are evocative of a mood, textures. If there are certain type treatments, as a designer, we do gravitate towards type styles, histories, time periods, within fragrance as a very specific example. Sometimes, for a fragrance launch of a brand new fragrance, we'll launch 3 fragrances together. One will be an aquatic, one will be a floral, and one will be a woody scent. Just as an example, this isn't like, I'm sure I have done this exact lineup before, but out of all of the fragrance launches I've done, I'm sure that this has existed. But, when you create the mood board for each one of these individual SKUs, the mood of those fragrances should be reflected in the mood board. And you shouldn't probably see another fragrance bottle on each of those mood boards, just as an example. Yeah. And so it's really about, trying to convey the concept in a visual way without trying to get too specific and too close to the actual product. I will say another caveat is that if you do find yourself putting benchmarks of other brands on your mood board, the problem with that is that you have stakeholders who maybe, like I said, are not, working in the creative departments, who start to become really aligned with what they're seeing on your mood board. And you think, okay, this is great. They're completely behind what we're doing. But it's because they see this other brand and they expect you to execute exactly what they're doing. And that gets you into a lot of hot water because you can't, as a creative, rip off another brand. It's just not, it's not what you were hired to do. It's not what ethically you should do. So I just, a big long spiel about not putting derivative work on the mood board. So yeah, I think that's very important.
Which is, I actually think is an awesome point, because I do see a lot of mood boards that do exactly that. And I think the natural inclination is to do that. Like, I'm a skincare brand, so I want to pick every swipe from skincare brands that I like. And I think that's the natural default. And it is a very cool perspective to hear that that's actually not what you should do.
No. So, that's a very good point. That what you're talking about should be reserved for the brand strategy phase. You need to know everything that's out there. You need to know your complete competitive landscape. If you're launching a new skincare brand, you need to know. You need to pull every visual of every skincare brand that's in your category that's competing directly against you. And you probably need to have them up on a wall somewhere. And you probably need to show this to your creative team, because these are things that you don't want to replicate. And, you also don't want to become too close in the market to them, because if, let's just say that you're competing in Sephora against a skincare brand, and you're shelved right next to them and you look just like them. That's a problem. You have no shelf pop, no shelf presence. And you could have prevented any of that just by having some awareness in the strategy, phase of the launch. But I'm sure brands are doing that and they're pretty aware. But it's just, just a thing to think about, because there is a lot of sameness out there.
For sure. So, for someone that's listening, and I know you've touched on this a little bit already, but for someone that's listening, that's like, okay, so I am a fragrance brand, I'm a skincare brand, I'm a hair cream, whatever they're selling. And they're trying to put together this mood board, but now they're like, okay, my own industry is off limits. What are a couple different things they should really be thinking about of searching, or what types of photography or inspo were they really putting on this mood board?
I mean, my absolute very favorite thing to do is to tune into to trend forecasting. So I always go to Fashion Snoops, WGSN, and start looking at things that are coming down for 2022, 2023. And I know that sounds forever away, but it's actually right around the corner. And if you're aware of things that are happening in fashion, in lifestyle, and architecture, those things are very related to every facet of consumer packaged goods. I mean, they're related to everything that we buy and everything that we see. If you see something in fashion, you will definitely see it 2 years later in some form, in packaging, in skincare, anything that you can think of. It all trickles through because it's really definitely a part of a whole lifestyle. So yeah, I personally, and if you're an entrepreneur starting out and you can't afford the subscription services, sign up for their free webinars. They do quarterly webinars that are I think they're free or very low cost, and they are full of really good information. So definitely a good starting place.
Solid. And those are solid resources to check out. And I think that's a helpful starting point for anybody. And what are the different scenarios and handoffs that a mood board can be used for?
Oh, that's such a good question, Lisa. If you have an idea, you might need a mood board. I mean, if you have an idea and you need to sell it to somebody, you might need a mood board. So beyond creating a new brand or a rebrand, so campaigns, obviously. If you're trying to differentiate for a launch, like I was saying, if you're trying to launch 3 different SKUs, you'll create 3 mood boards for each of those SKUs. I know we just barely touched on campaigns a little bit, but campaigns are expensive. Photo shoots are expensive. There's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of stakeholders that are involved. creating robust mood boards for not only the campaign, but also the individual shoots. I also used to create style mood boards for the stylists, which is very granular, but it helps to really inform like the styling decisions. You could also create mood boards if you're an entrepreneur wanting to pitch, VCs or retailers. When I was working for 5 years at Mesa, I used to hate it, but now I'm like so thankful. But I was the pitch deck girl. And so what that meant was like all of the strategy and marketing people would come to me because they knew I would do like an amazing job with their pitch decks, which is just basically styling them and making them beautiful. But the benefit was that I got to like look through them and sort of absorb all of these this key information about how to pitch retailers and strategy things. But the one thing that was always, always, always in every single one of these pitch decks for everything we did was a mood board, like a very solid mood board. And the mood board was the one thing that we would work, I would say at least we budgeted about 20 to 30 hours for each mood board. Very important because retailers, like let's just say you're like Target or Walgreens or Walmart, and you're getting pitched something that's pretty innovative, which for us at the time, we were doing a lot of things that were considered luxury at mass, which you see it a lot now, but at the time it was kind of a novel idea. And, being able to convey to a retailer what this product is going to be before we actually create it, because, we're trying to sell it through before we make it, is very important. And so the mood board is an important tool to convey along with, any renderings or packaging renderings. Having the mood board kind of tells you, you can put visuals of your persona on there. You can put visuals of, the scent. You can put visuals of the lifestyle that it's conveying. There's so many things that you can communicate in a mood board that you can't really communicate through text and actual representational images.
So I love that. If you have an idea, you need to have a mood board to go along with it. So with that said, what are the best tools for creating mood boards?
Okay, so it really comes down to like, what are you trying to do it for? A lot of times so you can look on Pinterest for things if you really can't find them elsewhere. I'd say you have to teach the AI and Pinterest like what you're trying to do, because there's a lot of crap in the beginning of your search. So you have to like stay at it for a while before you get to really good stuff. So I'd say Pinterest is a good place sometimes. It takes a lot of work to get to the good stuff. A lot of the free photography sites like Unsplash, Pexel, Kaboom Pics. But also if I'm trying to do something that's either for a campaign or a brand that's a little bit vintage or high fashion, I'll just go to a used bookstore and actually pull old magazines, like buy these old magazines and scan them in, because it's really cool when you can find something from the late 60s or early 70s, if that's the style of your brand or your campaign, and to actually scan in these images that are very much from that time and not just something that's interpreted and new, because, really you're going right to the source of the inspiration versus something that's been distilled and already interpreted for you. So I think that that's a really cool thing to do, is actually use real magazines. You can also use current magazines, of course, because there's lots of inspiration that's been currently, put out there. Like fashion editorials are a good source. Architectural magazines are a good source. A lot of times when you're doing form design, like perfume, fragrance design, packaging, or even just considering type design, having a look through any kind of architectural digest or architectural magazines, you can sort of get some sort of, for me, that's very inspiring and a good place to start.
I love the idea of throwing back to old magazines. That's a cool and an old school way to do it, and I love that.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through one of your favorite campaigns that you have done the concepting for?
Sure. Yeah. When I was hired at Creed, One of the very first things that I was hired to do was to create a new photography style for all of their photographs. And it was going to be for at least 2 years worth of campaigns. So, and it wasn't for seasonal campaigns. It was more for like retailer light boxes, our website, things that were evergreen. And so, we needed something that was going to be very much of the brand and that felt authentic to the brand, while at the same time maybe something a little bit new, because they were hiring me to bring something new to the brand. So yeah, the concept that I came up with is to create more of a lifestyle approach to the photography, where we would utilize more of this Dutch Renaissance 1700s style, but photography. But it looked like Dutch still life photography, or Dutch still life painting, but it was photography. There are a few photographers who I really love that sort of shoot in the style. One of them is Julia Hetta, and I really, really love her work. It feels like Dutch impression or Dutch old masters, but at the same time modern because of the way she styles her photo shoots. But the reason why I felt like this was an appropriate concept for the brand is that on every bottle of Creed, and it's in the tagline, it says "From father to son since 1760." So obviously it's in the brand DNA that it's from 1760. And I wanted a way to reflect that in photography, but make it still feel modern and updated. So having this sort of style to the photography felt very authentic to the brand to me. So again, creating a lot of mood boards that sort of showed the style, showed how it would be styled, because this is now a lifestyle setup instead of a studio setup. And what was really important to me, and what I found out was really important in communicating with this mood board, is that not everybody sees what you see when you look at a mood board. And it's really important to go through each of the items and sort of walk through why they're there. And if you want to get aligned on what you're doing, you need to discuss like every reason why every image is on that board, whether it's the styling, the lighting, the way that it's shot, the angles. Sometimes that's important. And just sort of understanding like the goal of each of the images that's on that mood board, because if everybody agrees to everything that you've done and everything that's there, then you're probably 3/4 of the way to a good campaign. Everybody's kind of understanding what's going on. So,
Christine, thank you so much for unpacking how concept gets built. I think this is valuable information for a brand's entire lifespan. So I'm grateful for the clarity of intent, and hopefully for those of you listening, this insight creates more efficiencies for your brand. For those of you listening, feel free to check out more of Christine's work at ChristineRClayton.com. And thank you for listening to the Visual Commerce Podcast.
Thank you for having me.